Miners expected rock and darkness. Instead, they uncovered objects that shouldn't exist, markings with no known origin, and chambers that were never supposed to be there. Some tunnels were sealed immediately after what was found. Join us, and let's descend into the most disturbing discoveries ever made deep underground. Let's go.
Number 13. The Roman stone coffin under a modern road. While crews were widening a busy road in eastern England, archaeologists came across a massive stone coffin that had been buried for over 1,000 years. The coffin weighed about 1,650 pounds and had been sitting along what was once a very important Roman route connecting towns and military outposts. David Harrison from Headland Archaeology said it was a fascinating find, and it's easy to see why. Stone coffins from this period almost never survive intact. Excavating it was tough. Teams of archaeologists and engineers worked for months carefully lifting and documenting the coffin to make sure nothing inside got damaged. The size and craftsmanship suggest it probably belonged to someone pretty important. Roman stone coffins were expensive and reserved for wealthy families or high-ranking officials. Finding one intact under a modern road is incredibly rare. Most were destroyed or broken up centuries ago when people repurposed the stone for other buildings.
Number 12. The underground ghost town frozen in time. The Sterling Mine Complex in Oregon shut down in the 1950s. The entrances collapsed a few times over the decades, but in 1999, experienced mine explorers accessed one of the deeper tunnels and discovered something shocking. Past the first few hundred feet deep inside the mountain, they stepped into a massive open cavern that once served as a staging area for miners. Inside the cavern were dozens of wooden structures still standing. There were lockers with names scratched into the doors, handwritten chalkboards with shift schedules, rusted cooking stoves, old boots still lined up on wooden shelves, and a first aid station with supplies still sitting on the table. Some spots even had newspapers from the 1940s that were still readable. It looked like the entire crew simply walked out one day and never came back. Because the cavern was sealed from sunlight and moisture, everything was frozen in time. Coffee cups sat on tables, jackets hung on hooks. A calendar on the wall was still turned to the last month the mine operated. Walking through it felt like stepping into a moment that had been paused for half a century.
I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you a naturally curious person? If you're watching, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. This space is made for people like us. To ensure you're always part of this community and receive all our latest discoveries, you just need to do one thing: subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected with us. Okay, now that you're part of our Legion of the Curious, let's move on to the next item.
Number 11. The mass grave beneath Leicester Cathedral. In the garden just a few meters from Leicester Cathedral, archaeologists found something very disturbing. Buried in a narrow vertical shaft were the remains of 123 men, women, and children. The bones date back over 800 years to the early 12th century. No one knows exactly why so many ended up in that tiny pit. According to Matthew Morris, who worked on the dig, their bones show no signs of violence. That leaves two possibilities: starvation or disease. At the moment, disease is the main working hypothesis. It looks as if successive cartloads of bodies were brought to the shaft and then dropped into it, one load on top of another in a very short space of time. He also estimated that the people in that pit made up about 5% of the town's population at the time. At first, the team thought the pit might be connected to the Black Death, but radiocarbon dating places this more than 150 years earlier than that pandemic. Morris said this was surprising because, as far as historians know, the bubonic plague didn't reach England until 1348. So what killed all these people? Even though the cause remains a mystery, there are hints about what life was like. The bodies weren't just thrown in carelessly. There was no sign of clothing, but their limbs were still together, which could mean they'd been wrapped in shrouds beforehand.
Number 10. The bone-filled sinkhole of Sac Actun. There's a sinkhole in southern Mexico that locals refuse to go near. They call it Sac Actun, and the warnings surrounding it aren't just superstition.
Back in 2014, archaeologist Bradley Russell and his team decided to dive into it to see what was down there. What they found was hair-raising. From the very first dive, they saw skulls. Getting down wasn't easy. They had to rappel 40 feet past massive stalactites and long tree roots. In the first chamber, skulls, ribs, and long bones were scattered across the floor. One skull, probably belonging to a woman, had been flattened on top, a Maya custom. A horseshoe-shaped jaw nearby showed it belonged to a young adult with perfect teeth still intact. The second chamber was darker and even more unsettling. It was completely underwater and twice the size of the first, holding at least 5 more skulls along with bones that had tumbled down after a chunk of the floor collapsed. Russell described exploring this place as terrifying. "This is very technical diving," he said. "You're crawling on your belly with your tanks scraping the ceiling, and there's no popping to the surface if something goes wrong." Why were all these bones down there? Why has this specific sinkhole been considered an ominous place for hundreds of years? Russell believes the people down there may have been plague victims. You wouldn't want them near the rest of the population, and you wouldn't want to drink the water either. That explanation makes sense, but it doesn't make the discovery any less disturbing.
Number 9. The Cave of Horror and its Hidden Scrolls. High up in the cliffs of Israel's Judean desert sits a cave that's earned a grim nickname, the Cave of Horror. From the outside, it doesn't look like much, but inside, it twists into low passages that open into chambers. Archaeologists found the skeletons of 40 people inside, men, women, and children who'd been hiding during a revolt around 132 to 136 CE. These were Jewish rebels and their families. Researchers said they were hiding from the Romans who'd set up camp on the cliffs above. The cave also held pieces of really old scrolls, including coins and a Greek copy of the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets. In 2021, new fragments turned up written in Greek, but with God's name, Yahweh, in Old Hebrew letters. Some of the texts didn't even match the Bible we know today. The discovery suggests these people brought their most sacred texts with them while fleeing for their lives. They died in that cave, but they protected those scrolls. The combination of human remains and ancient religious texts makes this one of the most haunting archaeological sites ever found.
Number 8. The eyeless creatures living in total darkness. In 2005, explorers in a long-abandoned lead mine in Wales recorded something unusual. They kept seeing pale shapes on the ground. At first, they thought the shapes were bits of ore or limestone. Then the shapes scurried away. They'd stumbled onto a population of albino cave insects and rodents that had adapted to the pitch-black environment. But then they found something even stranger. Several of the rodents were missing their eyes entirely. Not damaged or injured, just no eyeballs at all. Their skulls were smooth where the eye sockets should have been. Biologists later confirmed this was a known but rare mutation that occurs in animals isolated in complete darkness for many generations. The mine had been sealed for decades, which meant an entire colony had adapted underground without human interference. Even the biologists who studied them said the sight was disturbing. Seeing mammals with no eyes moving confidently through absolute darkness made the explorers rethink what can evolve in abandoned places humans never return to. These creatures had been down there for so long that their bodies had completely rewritten what it means to survive.
Number 7. The giant bones that weren't from any known animal. In 1965, a collapse inside the Lovelock Cave mining area in Nevada exposed a small chamber filled with massive bones. Workers initially thought they'd uncovered the remains of cattle or horses that had fallen from the surface. But when archaeologists examined them, they realized the bones were much older and didn't belong to any domesticated animal. The remains came from giant Pleistocene-era creatures that once roamed North America. Several bones belonged to a species of ancient camel and a type of giant short-faced bear. The bear bones were particularly massive, larger than the bones of modern grizzlies. The chamber had stayed sealed for thousands of years until the collapse exposed it. The bones were remarkably well preserved and showed claw marks on the surrounding stone, suggesting the animals had been trapped inside and died while trying to escape. The discovery painted a grim picture.
These massive creatures, some of the largest predators in North America at the time, had fallen into this chamber and couldn't get out. They died in darkness, scratching at the walls in a desperate attempt to find an exit.
Number 6. The Cannibal Cave of Atapuerca. Deep in northern Spain sits a cave called El Mirador, and what archaeologists pulled out of there is absolutely chilling. They found 11 people who didn't just die together around 5,700 years ago. They were killed and eaten. The bones tell the whole story. Blade marks sliced across the surfaces, burn marks from cooking fires, and bite marks that could only come from human teeth. One discovery stands out above the rest, a child's leg bone that someone cracked open to suck out the marrow. Antonio Rodriguez Hidalgo, one of the researchers examining these remains, explained that this kind of thing happened way more often in ancient times than most people realize. But here's the disturbing part. This wasn't about survival. All 11 victims died at the same time, and there's zero evidence of famine or food shortage in the area. The conclusion researchers reached is darker than simple hunger. This looks like a war ritual, a practice where enemies weren't just killed, but completely erased, both physically and spiritually. The attackers likely belonged to a rival group, and consuming their victims was the ultimate act of dominance. El Mirador sits in the Atapuerca region, which has become infamous for discoveries like this. Researchers now call it the ancient capital of cannibalism because of how many bones with cut marks have turned up there. Some of the oldest cases stretch back nearly 1 million years, painting a picture of violence that spans human history.
Number 5. The secret Nazi bunker beneath the driveway. Sean and Carolyn Tullier bought their house in Guernsey back in 2021 without knowing they were living on top of a World War II bunker buried 26 feet below their driveway. Guernsey, one of the Channel Islands, was occupied by German forces during the war, and the couple knew the area had military history, but nothing prepared them for what they found. A woman who used to live in the house reached out to Sean on Facebook after seeing one of his marketplace listings. She asked if he'd found the rooms below the house yet. Sean was confused. What rooms? That simple question kicked off a dig that lasted weeks. Sean and a friend used an excavator to move over 100 tons of dirt. Then the ground just gave way, and a doorway appeared. Inside was a preserved wartime hideout with multiple rooms, lined with bottles, rusted tins, and an escape hatch. On one wall, faded German letters spelled out Achtung Feind hört mit, which translates to, "Beware, the enemy is listening." The bunker had been sealed for decades, untouched since the occupation ended. Everything inside looked frozen in time, like the soldiers had just stepped out and never came back. The couple ended up turning the space into a games room, but the history of what happened down there still hangs in the air.
Number 4. The room filled with thousands of shoes. In 2012, explorers investigating an abandoned copper mine in Michigan found a narrow doorway they'd never noticed before. When they pushed it open, they discovered a room about 15 feet wide and 20 feet long. The entire floor was piled with shoes. Some were modern work boots, others were old, worn leather boots, and then there were tiny children's shoes from the early 1900s. Local historians looked into it and discovered that miners used to discard worn-out shoes in underground storage rooms to avoid hauling them back to the surface. The sheer number was shocking, though. There were thousands, far more than the mine's recorded workforce at any single point in time. Even stranger, some of the shoes were clearly ceremonial or decorative, shoes that had nothing to do with mining. This led to speculation that the room had been used long before the copper operation began. Perhaps it was a burial site or some kind of offering chamber. The true explanation has never been agreed upon, and the room has since collapsed, making further investigation impossible.
Number 3. The tunnel that shouldn't exist. In 2013, explorers entered an abandoned gold mine in Arizona that they'd been to before. They knew the layout by heart. But on this visit, one of them spotted something that made no sense, a narrow side passage that wasn't on any of the old survey maps. The walls were different too. They were smooth and cut almost perfectly flat, unlike the rest of the mine, which still had rough tool marks everywhere. The men followed the passage about 30 feet until it suddenly stopped at a dead end.
The end of the tunnel was even stranger. Embedded in the wall were marks that looked like mechanical cuts, almost like a drill had chewed its way forward and then suddenly stopped. There were no signs of explosives, no blast marks, no leftover powder, and the floor had odd metallic shavings scattered across it that didn't match anything used in gold mining. After the explorers posted their findings online, retired geologists and former miners reached out. None of them had an explanation. The tunnel didn't match any known mining equipment in the region. It was never explained who carved it or why it stopped exactly where it did. Because the passage wasn't on any official map and no company ever claimed it, it remains one of the strangest undocumented tunnels ever found in an abandoned mine.
Number 2. The hidden coffin behind the mine wall. In 1989, workers doing safety checks in an abandoned coal mine in Poland broke through a thin sandstone wall. Behind it was a small carved alcove containing a simple wooden coffin. The coffin was old, but shockingly well preserved given the humidity in the mine. Inside was the body of a man dressed in clothing from the late 1700s. Local historians documented the body and confirmed the clothing style matched that period. But no one had any record of a burial taking place anywhere near the mine. The alcove appeared to have been carved intentionally and sealed long before the mining tunnels reached that area. The leading theory is that the alcove predates the mine by many decades and may have been a secret burial placed there during a time of conflict or disease outbreak. Perhaps the man died of something contagious and his family buried him in secret to avoid spreading illness. Or maybe he was killed and hidden to prevent discovery. The coffin was removed and the alcove sealed soon after, but the mystery of who buried the man and why they hid him inside a mountain remains unsolved.
Number 1. The fresh footprints in the sealed mine. In 1974, a mine safety crew entered an abandoned iron mine in Minnesota to survey the stability of the tunnels. The mine had been closed since the 1930s, and all main entrances were covered with steel grates locked by the state. Once the team descended about 600 feet, one of the inspectors noticed something odd in the dust on the floor. Shoe prints. Fresh ones. The pattern was clear and sharp, which meant they'd been made within days, not decades. The prints continued down a long passage into an area that had suffered multiple cave-ins. The crew followed them until they reached a section where the tunnel roof had collapsed completely. The prints stopped at the edge of the rubble. The team searched for hours and found no one. No evidence of camping, no tools, no water bottles, nothing. They checked the entrances again on the way out, and all were locked exactly as they had been when they arrived. Nobody could explain how someone got in or where they went. The mine was sealed even tighter after that, but the mystery of those footprints has never been solved.
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.